The hushed silence of the old house was Elara's constant companion, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos that once filled her life. Now the only sound was the gentle click of her vintage film camera, a cherished relic and a gift from her late sister, Lena. Elara, a reclusive photographer, sought solace not in company, but in the forgotten corners of the world, finding hidden beauty in the mundane. An abandoned attic, a dust-laden library, the peeling paint of a forgotten mural. These were her canvases and her lens, her only confidant. Each click was an attempt to capture a fragment of the quiet dignity she believed still resided in these overlooked spaces, a silent prayer for the peace that eluded her own heart. But lately, the solitude felt less like solace and more like a stage for an unseen observer. A persistent, prickling sensation, like cold fingers tracing the nape of her neck, accompanied her on every shoot. It wasn't the usual artist's hyper-awareness. This was something more visceral, a profound unease that settled deep in her bones. She would pause, camera half-raised, scanning the empty rooms, the silent corridors, but always there was nothing. Just the silence, thick and heavy, and the lingering sense of being watched, a phantom gaze following her every move. She dismissed it as fatigue, the lingering echoes of her own grief playing tricks on her mind, yet the feeling never truly dissipated. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elara was developing a roll of film from a shoot in an old, deserted orphanage. The air in the dark room was thick with the scent of chemicals, a familiar comfort. As the image slowly bloomed on the photographic paper, her breath hitched. It was a picture of an empty nursery, cribs neatly lined against the wall, bathed in the soft, diffused light from a grimy window. But in the very center of the frame, where nothing had been, a faint, inexplicable blur shimmered. It was translucent, almost ethereal, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled the print closer, her eyes scrutinizing every pixel. It wasn't a smudge on the lens, nor a flaw in the film. The edges of the blur were too defined, too deliberate, and as she stared, a chilling realization dawned upon her. The blur, indistinct as it was, seemed to possess an almost human shape, a faint outline of a form, perhaps a head, shoulders, and the suggestion of outstretched limbs, hovered in the space where emptiness should have reigned. It was an anomaly that defied logic, a silent scream captured on film. What was it? A trick of light, a photographic aberration, or something far more profound? Something that had been there, unseen, unheard, until her camera had dared to capture its spectral presence. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The chilling revelation of the nursery photograph sent a tremor through Elara, but it was just the beginning. The blur, the subtle hint of a form, haunted her waking thoughts and invaded her dreams. Yet, beneath the growing fear, a strange, almost desperate curiosity began to bloom. It tugged at a part of her that had long been dormant, a part that remembered laughter and shared secrets, a part that ached for connection. Her mind drifted back to Lena, her sister, whose vibrant spirit had once been the sun around which Elara's more reserved world revolved. Lena, with her infectious giggle and eyes that sparkled with an unquenchable thirst for adventure, had been the one to press that very film camera into Elara's hands years ago. "Capture the magic, Elara," Lena had urged, her voice a melody of encouragement. "You see things others don't. Show them." Lena had always believed in Elara's artistic vision, even when Elara herself doubted it. They had been inseparable, two halves of a whole, navigating the complexities of childhood and the awkwardness of adolescence with an unbreakable bond. The memory of Lena's warmth was a stark contrast to the icy grip of guilt that now enveloped Elara. Lena's death, a sudden brutal car accident, had shattered Elara's world and in many ways her spirit. The details were a blur of flashing lights and hushed voices, but the crushing weight of responsibility remained. Elara had been angry that day, a petty argument over a forgotten errand, and Lena had stormed out, getting into her car in a huff. Elara had always believed that if she hadn't let anger cloud her judgment, If she had just called Lena back, her sister would still be alive. This self-blame had been the architect of her reclusiveness, building walls around her heart, brick by painful brick. The unsettling phenomena in her photographs, however, refused to be ignored. After the nursery, more distinct, shadowy figures began to emerge in subsequent prints. They weren't just blurs anymore. In an image of an abandoned theater, a tall, slender form seemed to stand in the wings, its head tilted as if listening. In a photograph of an old ivy-covered mansion, a smaller, almost childlike silhouette peered from an upstairs window. Each new image chipped away at Elara's already fragile sanity, pushing her further into isolation. She stopped answering calls, her studio becoming her sanctuary and her prison. Was she losing her mind? Were these spectral visitations a manifestation of her grief, a desperate plea from her subconscious? She would spend hours staring at the photographs, her breath held captive in her chest, searching for answers in the grainy shadows. The figures were always indistinct, like smoke given form, yet undeniably present. One evening, as the rain lashed against her dark room window, mirroring the storm raging within her, she pulled a new batch of prints from the developer. The last one was of an old carousel, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, decaying under a tarp. And there, perched on the back of a chipped white horse, was a shadowy figure. It was clearer than the others, its contours more defined. And around its neck, catching the faint light in the photograph, was a delicate silver chain. Attached to it, unmistakably, was a tiny, intricately carved locket. Lena's locket, the one Elara had given her for her 16th birthday, a cherished keepsake Lena had worn every single day until the accident. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a trick of light or a figment of her imagination. This was Lena. It had to be. The undeniable presence of Lena's locket in the photograph jolted Elara from her spiral of self-doubt and grief-stricken madness. It was a tangible link, a beacon in the swirling fog of her psychological torment. This wasn't just her imagination, nor was it some random spectral phenomena. This was personal, deeply, agonizingly personal. A renewed, fierce determination ignited within her, pushing aside the fear that had paralyzed her for so long. If these were indeed manifestations of her beloved sister, then Elara would move heaven and earth to understand what Lena was trying to communicate. Her once solitary studio transformed into a research hub. Books on local history, forgotten legends, and the supernatural piled high on every surface, mingling with her photographic equipment. Elara devoured texts, her eyes scanning for any mention of restless spirits, unfinished business, or souls tethered to the earthly plane by unresolved grief. She learned about ancient burial grounds, tragic local events, and the whispers of old wives' tales that spoke of spectral presences manifesting to those closest to them, often to convey a message or seek closure. The common thread in these stories was always a strong emotional bond, a connection that transcended the veil between life and death. This resonated deeply with Elara, who knew her bond with Lena was precisely that strong. One afternoon, buried amidst dusty tomes in a forgotten corner of the municipal library, Elara stumbled upon an old, leather-bound diary. Its pages, brittle with age, contained the faded ink of a local woman from the late 19th century. The entries chronicled not only her daily life, but also her profound grief after the sudden loss of her younger sister. Interspersed within the personal narrative were cryptic observations about strange occurrences, flickering lights, unexplained cold spots, and fleeting, shadow-like figures that seemed to mimic her lost sister's movements. The diary spoke of the belief that spirits, especially those of the tragically departed, would sometimes linger, unable to find peace until their emotional ties to the living were acknowledged or their unfinished earthly tasks completed. It was a mirror to Elara's own experience, a chilling confirmation that she might not be alone in her spectral encounters. A powerful, almost visceral hope surged through Elara. What if these figures weren't malevolent entities, but Lena herself? What if her sister, trapped in some ethereal realm, was reaching out, trying to bridge the gap between their worlds? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. If it was Lena, then perhaps, just perhaps, Elara could find a way to communicate back, to offer the peace and closure that had eluded them both. It was a chance, however slim, at redemption for her gnawing guilt, a desperate plea for forgiveness that she had never had the opportunity to utter. This quest became her sole focus, eclipsing everything else. Yet amidst this burgeoning hope, a persistent shadow of doubt began to creep in, chilling her renewed resolve. The stories in the diary, while offering a framework for understanding, also hinted at the dangers of interacting with the unknown. Was it truly Lena, or was her grief-stricken mind simply projecting her deepest desires onto these ambiguous forms? Could something else, something far more sinister and manipulative, be exploiting her vulnerability, using Lena's image as a cruel bait? The figures, though bearing the locket, still remained indistinct, their forms shifting, never truly solidifying into the Lena she remembered. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. The stakes were incredibly high. If it was Lena, Elara could finally find peace. If it was something else, she risked losing what little sanity she had left, perhaps even her soul. Elara returned to her dark room, the flickering red light casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock her uncertainty. She meticulously re-examined every photograph, searching for patterns, for clues beyond the locket. She arranged them on a large corkboard, connecting them with red string, a detective unraveling a spectral mystery. Then she noticed it. In a photograph taken of an abandoned greenhouse, where the light filtered through broken panes like a shattered mosaic, one of the shadowy figures was clearly, unmistakably, pointing. Its arm, a mere wisp of darkness, was extended, its index finger aimed with an unnerving precision towards a specific spot in the background. It was a forgotten, overgrown area, barely visible through the tangled vines and debris. A forgotten location, now etched into Elara's mind, a new, compelling clue in this haunting puzzle. The pointed finger in the photograph served as a silent yet powerful directive. Elara felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of trepidation and desperate hope. This was it, the next step in her macabre quest. Armed with her ever-present camera and a renewed sense of purpose, she set out, tracing the vague contours of the forgotten location from the image. Her journey led her away from the familiar bustling streets, down a winding, seldom-used path that grew progressively narrower and more choked with overgrown foliage. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of her studio. Eventually, the path opened into a clearing, revealing what must have once been a meticulously manicured garden. Now, it was a wild tangle of thorny bushes, skeletal rose trellises draped with ivy, and gnarled trees that clawed at the gray sky. This place, forgotten by time and nature, held an eerie stillness, broken only by the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Following the precise direction indicated by the shadowy figure, Elara pushed through a dense thicket of brambles, her clothes snagging, her skin prickling with small scratches. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. Beneath an ancient, sprawling oak tree, its roots coiling like giant serpents across the ground, she found it. Partially unearthed by the relentless march of time and the shifting earth, was a small, weathered wooden box. Its surface was encrusted with soil and moss, blending almost perfectly with its surroundings. With trembling hands, Elara knelt, carefully brushing away the debris. The box felt strangely light, yet held the weight of untold secrets. She pried open the rusted latch, revealing a collection of Lena's most cherished possessions. A faded silk ribbon, a tiny, tarnished silver thimble Lena had used for her doll's clothes, and a pressed forget-me-not, dry and brittle, and nestled beneath them, carefully folded, was a letter. Elara's fingers shook as she unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Lena's, a familiar, looping script that now seemed alien and distant. As her eyes scanned the words, a cold dread began to seep into her bones, replacing the hope that had sustained her. The letter was addressed to Elara, a confession, a desperate plea for understanding. Lena wrote of a secret affair, a clandestine relationship with Mark, Elara's then fiancé. The words blurred before Elara's eyes, each sentence a fresh stab to her heart. Lena expressed her profound guilt, her agonizing conflict, and her intention to confess everything to Elara. She had been on her way to meet Mark, to finally break off their affair and reveal the truth to Elara, when the accident occurred. The fatal crash wasn't just a tragic mishap. It was Lena's desperate, misguided attempt to clear her conscience, an act of courage that had cost her everything. The world spun. Elara's grief, once a dull, constant ache, transformed into a searing, white-hot rage. Betrayal. It was a word that tasted like ash in her mouth. Mark, Lena, both had conspired, albeit in different ways, to shatter her world, to build a foundation of lies upon which her life had unknowingly rested. The love she had felt for Mark, the unwavering devotion she had held for Lena, curdled into a bitter cocktail of anger and disillusionment. The accident, the guilt that had consumed her for so long, the spectral manifestations, it all coalesced into a monstrous revelation. She looked down at the box, at Lena's trinkets, once symbols of an innocent past, now tainted by this devastating truth. The air around her seemed to thicken, the shadows of the overgrown garden deepening, taking on a new menacing quality. She glanced at her camera, then back at the photographs she had brought with her, the ones depicting the shadowy figures. Before, they had seemed mournful, perhaps even pleading. Now, in the harsh light of this devastating truth, their gestures appeared accusatory, their forms more sinister. They were not Lena reaching out from beyond the grave. They were the manifestations of a terrible hidden truth, a secret so profound it had twisted her perception of reality. The betrayal was unveiled, and Elara was left standing in its ruins, her heart a desolate wasteland of shattered trust. The raw, visceral shock of betrayal ignited a fire within Elara, eclipsing the lingering tendrils of grief. Mark, her Mark, had woven a web of deceit that entangled her sister, Lena, in a tragic, fatal lie. The shadowy figures, once spectral messengers, now felt like silent accusers, their forms in the photographs morphing from sorrowful to menacing. Elara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she could not let this lie fester any longer. The truth, however painful, demanded to be unearthed, brought into the light, and confronted. Her confrontation with Mark was inevitable, a storm brewing since the discovery of Lena's letter. She found him at his usual cafe, the mundane setting a stark contrast to the earthquake about to erupt between them. He sat there, oblivious, sipping his coffee, a picture of calm that infuriated her to her core. Elara approached his table, her camera clutched tightly in her hand, its weight a grounding force. Her voice, when she spoke his name, was low, trembling with suppressed fury. Mark looked up, his smile faltering as he met her gaze. The casual pleasantry died on his lips, replaced by a flicker of unease, then dawning recognition of the storm in her eyes. "Elara, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with feigned concern. She slammed Lena's letter onto the table between them, the brittle paper crinkling with a sharp, accusatory sound. "This is what's wrong, Mark." She seethed, her words barely a whisper but carrying the force of a thunderclap. "This is what's been wrong for years." His eyes widened as he saw Lena's familiar script, then darted to Elara's face, a mask of horror seizing his features. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt. He tried to speak, but no words came, only a strangled gasp. The truth, long buried, had clawed its way to the surface. Elara's voice rose, each word a hammer blow. "You and Lena, all this time. You let me grieve. You comforted me, knowing the whole truth, knowing you were part of why she died." He finally found his voice, hoarse and desperate. "Elara, please let me explain. It wasn't what you think." But his eyes betrayed him, filled with a raw, agonizing guilt that confirmed every word of Lena's confession. He confessed, a torrent of words tumbling out, laced with self-loathing and regret. He spoke of the affair, born of loneliness and a moment of weakness, fueled by Lena's adventurous spirit and his own unmet needs. He described Lena's growing remorse, her determination to end it, to tell Elara everything. He admitted his own cowardice, his fear of losing Elara, of shattering their lives. He confessed to the agonizing burden of his secret, the hollowness of his comfort, the suffocating weight of his complicity in Lena's tragic end. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face, a mixture of shame and relief. Elara, her own heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions, raised her camera. The click of the shutter was loud in the suddenly silent cafe, capturing his raw, unvarnished confession. It was not an act of vengeance, but of documentation, of exposing the truth that had festered for too long. The camera, once a tool for capturing unseen beauty, now became an instrument of unyielding reality. As if sensing the full revelation, the air around them shifted. A chill swept through the cafe, causing patrons to shiver and glance uneasily. The shadowy figures, unseen by anyone but Elara, coalesced and swirled around them, their forms intensely agitated. They were no longer mournful or accusatory. They were a vortex of chaotic energy, a manifestation of the suppressed pain and lies finally coming undone. In that moment, Elara understood. The spirits were never Lena, not truly. They were the physical embodiment of her own unresolved grief, the unspoken truths, the festering lies that had poisoned her reality. They were the spectral echoes of betrayal, her mind projecting the unseen forces that had shaped her life. As Mark's confession continued, each word chipping away at the edifice of lies, the swirling shadows began to dissipate. They thinned, growing fainter, their agitated dance slowing. The cafe's warmth slowly returned, the uneasy chill receding. But one figure, a faint, wispy outline, lingered. It hovered near Elara, its form almost translucent, yet distinct enough for her to perceive. It wasn't menacing now, nor accusing. It seemed different. As the last vestiges of the other shadows faded completely, this solitary form seemed to reach out, a gesture not of malice, but of something akin to a final, ethereal touch, a silent farewell. The lingering figure, a wisp of light and memory, offered a silent, profound understanding. It was not Lena's ghost, but the final fading echo of Elara's own profound internal chaos, a manifestation of the truth she had so desperately sought and simultaneously feared. As Mark's broken words continued to fill the space between them, the last wispy outline dissolved entirely, leaving only the mundane sounds of the cafe, now stripped of its spectral overlay. The chill receded completely, replaced by a sense of calm, a fragile peace settling over Elara. With the truth fully laid bare, Elara felt an unfamiliar lightness, as if a monumental weight had been lifted from her soul. The anger, though still present, was no longer a consuming fire, but a smoldering ember, allowing space for a different kind of resolve to ignite. She looked at Mark, his face buried in his hands, his confession a testament to his own long-suffering guilt. Forgiveness was a distant shore, but understanding, a nascent seed, had begun to sprout. Elara knew then what she had to do. The photographs, the hidden letter, Mark's raw confession, these were not merely relics of a painful past, but pieces of a larger, more complex narrative. Lena's story, so long shrouded in Elara's idealized memory and Mark's deceit, deserved to be told authentically, with all its beautiful, messy, and tragic complexities. Elara would use her camera, not as a weapon of exposure, but as a tool for remembrance, for healing. She would honor Lena's memory not by preserving a sanitized image, but by revealing the full truth of her life, her choices, and her tragic end. In the days that followed, Elara began the painstaking process of piecing together Lena's true story. She revisited the abandoned garden, not with a sense of dread, but with a quiet reverence. The overgrown weeds, the crumbling stone, the hidden box, they all spoke of a life lived, a secret kept, and a truth waiting to be found. She took her camera, the very instrument that had once recorded the unseen torment of her grief, and focused it on the vibrant life now reclaiming the garden. The sun dappled through the leaves, painting patterns on the mossy ground. It was a place of peace, of natural cycles, of decay and rebirth. She composed a single final photograph of the garden. The light was soft, ethereal, illuminating the nascent blossoms and the ancient trees. There were no shadowy figures, no wisps of lingering grief. Instead, a soft, almost imperceptible glow emanated from the center of the frame, a quiet luminescence that hinted at peace, at acceptance. It was a photograph that captured not what wasn't there, but what finally was: clarity, serenity, and a profound sense of closure. Elara found a new purpose in her photography, one rooted in stories of healing and resilience. Her lens, once focused on the spectral manifestations of her own pain, now sought out the quiet strength in vulnerability, the subtle beauty in brokenness, the restorative power of truth. She began to photograph people who had faced their own betrayals, their own griefs, capturing their journeys towards forgiveness and self-acceptance. Each click of the shutter was a step further on her own path, a testament to her evolving understanding of the human spirit. The camera had indeed recorded something that wasn't there, not literal ghosts, but the powerful unseen forces of unresolved grief, the suffocating weight of betrayal, and ultimately, the transformative journey towards redemption. Elara had learned that some truths are not tangible, not visible to the naked eye. They are etched in the heart, whispered in the subconscious, and sometimes only revealed when we are truly ready to see, to confront, and to forgive. She found peace, not in forgetting Lena, but in understanding her, in embracing the messy reality of her sister's life, and in finally forgiving herself for a burden that was never truly hers to bear. The lens of her camera, once clouded by sorrow, now captured the world with a newfound clarity, reflecting the quiet strength she had discovered within herself.